The first thing I remember is the spoon in his hand. It was an old stainless steel spoon, the kind we had used so many times the edge had gone dull, and he was turning it over and over beside a bowl of applesauce he had stopped eating. The kitchen was quiet except for the clock above the pantry door. He was 8 years old, small for his age. His hair still had that pale summer color children get when they spend every daylight hour outdoors. He looked at me and asked, "Grandpa, did my mother leave because she didn't want me?" I knew the truth. I had known it from the morning she disappeared from his life. But I looked at that boy and gave him an answer I thought would protect him. It took me 20 years to understand what that answer cost. My name is Malin. I have been Amish all my life, and I have been a grandfather long enough to learn that age does not make a man wise by itself. Sometimes age only gives him enough years to see where he was foolish. I tell these stories because there are things a family can carry quietly for so long that silence begins to look like virtue. If you have ever kept something from someone because you believed the truth would hurt them, I would like to know whether you still believe you made the right choice. His mother was my daughter Ruth. She was our third child and our first girl. When she was little, she had a habit of collecting smooth stones from the lane and putting them along the sill above her bed. Not pretty stones, not special stones. Just stones she liked because of the shape or the feel of them. My wife used to shake her head when she cleaned the room because there would be dirt under everyone. Ruth would wash them, line them back up, and remember exactly where each one belonged. She grew into the sort of young woman who noticed what other people missed. A loose hinge, a neighbor who had not been to church in 2 Sundays, a child pretending not to be hungry. She was not loud about kindness. She just did the next thing that seemed needed. When she married, I believe she had made a good match. I will not give the man's name. He is still alive, and this story is not about making a spectacle of him. He came from a family we knew. He worked hard. He was steady in public. There were no signs, at least none I allowed myself to recognize, that the marriage would become something very different inside their own house. Their son, Daniel, was born a few years later, my first grandson. I remember holding him in our kitchen while rain struck the windows and Ruth slept in the back room. He had one fist tucked against his cheek. I thought then that I understood what my work was. You raise children, you teach them, you help them marry. Then grandchildren come, and you become the older tree they can stand under when the weather changes. I did not understand how much weather was coming. Ruth changed after Daniel was born, not all at once. That is the part people misunderstand when they look backward. They imagine a hard thing arrives with a bell around its neck. Most hard things do not. They come quietly. A daughter who used to stay through supper begins leaving before the dishes are washed. A woman who once met your eyes starts looking toward the door when a wagon passes. A sleeve is pulled down though the day is warm. A laugh becomes rare enough that you notice when you hear it. My wife noticed sooner than I did. Mothers often do. She would find reasons to send food over. She would ask Ruth to help with canning or mending so she could have her in the house for an afternoon. I told myself that young marriages have seasons. I told myself that new parents are tired. I told myself many things that had the advantage of requiring nothing from me. The plain truth is that I did not want to know more than I knew. In our community, family problems were supposed to be handled carefully, privately. A marriage was not something you threw open for neighbors to examine. That idea can protect people from gossip. It can also become a wall behind which a frightened person disappears. One November evening, Ruth came to our house after dark. Daniel was 5 then. She had walked part of the way. I remember mud dried along the hem of her dress and one broken hook near her collar. She sat near the stove but did not take off her bonnet. She spoke with my wife first. Then they called me into the room. She told us her marriage was not safe for her anymore. I am choosing those words carefully. She did not give us a speech. She did not accuse loudly. She did not ask me to hate her husband. She said she needed somewhere to stay, and she needed Daniel with her. I wish I could tell you that I stood up immediately and said my house was hers for as long as she needed it. That is the father I believed I was. It is not the father I was that night. I asked questions. Some were reasonable. Some were cowardly. I asked whether she had spoken to her husband. I asked whether she had spoken to the minister. I asked whether perhaps she could stay with us for a few days while everyone became calmer. I asked whether taking Daniel away suddenly would make matters worse. Each question placed another inch of distance between my daughter and me. The next weeks were meetings, not dramatic meetings, no shouting that I heard. Men sitting in rooms, hats on pegs, boots lined by the door, voices kept low. There was concern about the marriage, concern about Daniel, concern about scandal, concern about whether Ruth was being too quick to leave. Every concern sounded serious when spoken alone. Together they created a weight that fell almost entirely on her. Ruth wanted to leave the settlement and stay with an aunt of my wife's who lived several hours away. She wanted Daniel to go with her. Her husband objected. The ministers believed the boy should remain where his home, father, school, and church were established until the adults could settle the matter. I agreed with them. That sentence is not easy for me to say even now. I agreed because I was afraid of breaking things. I was afraid of helping my daughter make a choice that could not be undone. I was afraid of being the father who encouraged separation. I was afraid of being wrong in front of the church, but fear has a way of dressing itself in responsible clothing. Ruth left without Daniel. She did not abandon him. I want that said plainly. She left because by then she believed staying would destroy whatever strength she had left, and she believed she would be able to return for her son after matters were settled. They were never settled the way she hoped. She wrote, "At first often, letters came to our house because communication with her husband had become difficult. She asked about Daniel's health, his schooling, whether he still rubbed his left ear when he was tired. She remembered the smallest things. She asked me to tell him she loved him. I told him she was away. Then I told him she needed time. Then, as months turned into years, I told him she had chosen a different life. That was the lie. It was not one sentence spoken once. It was a house I built around him, one board at a time. I did not tell him that his mother wrote asking to see him. I did not tell him how many times she asked me to bring him somewhere they could meet. I did not tell him that I had been advised not to interfere with the decisions made about his home. I did not tell him that sometimes I read her letters twice and then put them in a wooden box under old account books in my desk. I told myself a boy needed stability more than explanations. Daniel lived mostly with his father, but he was at our farm often. He helped me stack firewood. He learned to set fence posts straight. He was quiet the way some children become quiet when they sense that every adult around them knows something they do not. At 8, he asked me the question over the applesauce. I said his mother loved him in her own way, but she had decided to live somewhere else and could not be the mother he needed. Even now, I can remember the exact sound of the spoon when he set it down. He nodded once. Children will often accept the answer an old man gives them, especially when they trust him. That trust is what troubles me most. For years, Daniel did not ask again. I took his silence as proof that I had protected him. That is another mistake old men make. We confuse the absence of a question with the absence of pain. Ruth's letters became less frequent, but they never stopped completely. She built a life elsewhere. She worked in a bakery for a time. Later, she cared for an older woman. She did not come back to the church. That made it easier for some people to speak of her as if the leaving had been what she wanted all along. I knew better. Once, when Daniel was about 12, Ruth sent a small parcel. Inside was a hand-carved wooden horse. Nothing fine. The legs were uneven. She had made it herself with a borrowed knife because Daniel used to line up toy horses along the floor when he was small. I kept that too. I did not give it to him. There are decisions a man makes that feel complicated when he's making them and become very simple when he's old. That was wrong. I can tell you every reason I had. I can tell you I feared confusing the boy. I can tell you I respected his father's wishes. I can tell you I was trying to keep peace with the church and within the family. I can tell you that I believed there would be a better time later. All of those things may be true. They do not make the wooden horse any lighter in my hand. Daniel grew up. He became capable, dependable, and hard to read. By 17, he could handle a team better than many grown men. By 20, he had the same habit his mother had of noticing what other people missed. He would tighten a loose screw without being asked. He would leave food on a widow's porch and never mention it. Sometimes I saw Ruth in him so clearly that I had to look away. He never joined the church. That caused talk, but not as much as some might imagine. He said he was not ready. Then he began working farther from home. Eventually he moved away too. For a long while I thought the story had reached its ending. A mother gone, a son grown, an old grandfather carrying a box of letters no one knew existed. Then my wife died. Loss has a way of rearranging the furniture inside a man. Things you walked around for years suddenly stand directly in your path. After the funeral, I began sorting through drawers and cupboards. Not quickly. I would do one shelf and stop. Her sewing basket stayed untouched for nearly 6 months because I could still see her hand reaching into it. One winter afternoon, I opened the desk. The box was there. Ruth's letters, the little horse, a photograph she had sent many years after leaving, standing outside a bakery in a plain dark coat, older but unmistakably my daughter. Daniel was 28 then. 20 years had passed since the kitchen table. I sat with that box until the room went dark. For years I had believed confession would ease my conscience. Sitting there, I understood that easing my conscience was not the point. Telling the truth might make Daniel angrier. It might cost me his trust completely. It might open a wound he had built his whole life around. But the wound already existed. My silence had only taught him the wrong shape of it. I wrote to him and asked him to visit. I did not explain why. He came on a cold Saturday in February. There was old snow along the north side of the barn, gray on top from wind-blown dust. He had become a man by then, of course, but when he stepped through my kitchen door, I saw the 8-year-old boy before I saw anything else. I put the box on the table. I told him everything I could remember, not to excuse myself. Not to blame the ministers, his father, the customs of that time, or fear. Those things belonged in the story, but the choice I had made belonged to me. I told him his mother had wanted him. I told him she had written for him. I told him I had hidden the letters. I told him I had the wooden horse before he was 13 years old and had kept it from him. He did not interrupt. That was harder than anger would have been. When I finished, I pushed the box toward him. He opened the first letter, then another. He did not read them all. There were too many. He held one by the corners for a long time and looked at the handwriting. Then he said one thing to me that I have carried ever since. I spent half my life believing I was easy to leave. There are sentences that divide a life into before and after. That was one of them. I had thought I was protecting a child from a complicated truth. Instead, I gave him a simple lie, and he used that lie to explain himself to himself. A child does that. If a parent disappears and no one gives him the truth, he does not leave the empty space empty. He fills it, often with himself. Maybe I was not worth staying for. Maybe I was too difficult. Maybe I was not loved enough. I had never said those things to Daniel, but the lie I told gave them room to grow. He took the box home. For several weeks, I did not hear from him. I had no right to demand that he come back quickly and comfort the old man who had finally decided to be honest. Eventually, he contacted his mother. I will not describe their reunion because it belongs to them, not to me. I know only that they spoke. Then they spoke again. The lost years could not be restored. There is no honest story where 20 years simply vanish because people finally tell the truth. But a door opened. Months later, Daniel came to see me again. He was not warm. He was not cruel. There was a careful distance in him I had earned. We walked the fence line behind the barn. The ground was soft from spring thaw, and our boots sank at the heels. We repaired 2 loose strands of wire. He did not mention his mother until we were almost finished. He told me they were trying, that was all. Trying is not a small word when people have lost 20 years. I am older now than my own grandfather was when I thought him ancient. I have had time to consider why I lied. It would be comforting to say I lied out of love. There was love in it. There was also pride, fear, obedience, concern about how our family would be seen. A belief that older men should know what was best, a desire to avoid conflict, and perhaps most of all, a habit of mistaking quiet for peace. Quiet is not always peace. Sometimes quiet is only pain that has learned not to knock on the door. I think about Ruth as a young woman standing near our stove with dried mud on her hem. I think about Daniel turning that spoon beside his applesauce. I think about the box in my desk and how easy it became year after year not to open it. That is the dangerous thing about a lie told for what seems like a good reason. The first telling can feel difficult. The second is easier. Then the lie becomes part of the furniture. You dust around it. You build routines around it. After enough years, telling the truth feels like the disruption, though the lie has been doing the damage all along. I do not believe every truth must be handed to a child in its full adult weight. Children need care. They need words suited to their age. There are details they should not have to carry. But there is a difference between protecting a child from details and changing the meaning of what happened. I changed the meaning. I turned a mother who was trying to reach her son into a mother who had simply chosen to leave him. That was easier for the adults around him. It was not easier for him. If I could sit again at that kitchen table 20 years ago, I would not empty every adult trouble into the lap of an 8-year-old boy. I would tell him something simpler and truer. I would tell him his mother loved him. I would tell him adults were making decisions he could not control. I would tell him her absence was not proof that he had been unwanted. And I would keep telling him that until he believed me. Age has taught me that children can survive a difficult truth when love stands beside it. What damages them more deeply is often the story they invent when everyone they trust refuses to tell them anything true. Daniel and I are not what we were before I opened that box. I would be lying again if I told you otherwise, but we are something honest now. He visits, not as often as I would like, but enough. Sometimes we work without talking much. Sometimes he asks a question and I answer it plainly, even when the answer makes me look small. That is one thing I can still give him, the truth, late as it is. And I have learned not to call lateness useless. A truth told 20 years late cannot repair 20 years, but it can stop the 21st year from being built on the same lie. That may not sound like much to a younger man. To an old one, it is enough to begin. If there is someone in your family who was given a story that never quite made sense, you may understand why I am telling you this. And if you have ever had to choose between a painful truth and a comforting explanation, I would like to hear what you learned from it. If you want to sit with me again for another story from a long Amish life, you can subscribe. I will keep telling them as plainly as I know how. And I would especially like you to answer this in the comments. When does protecting someone from the truth become a lie that hurts them more? I have my answer now. It took me 20 years to find it.